Welcome to the Colts Law Podcast. I'm Lawrence Owen, your host, and today I have a very, very special guest. I got the Indianapolis Star's Colts insider and co-host of the Cover 2 podcast, Jim Ayello. Jim, thank you so much for joining my podcast today.
Oh, thanks for having me. I'm excited to do it. Like I said, yeah, I've been a fan, so I'm glad I get a chance to join you.
Oh, awesome. So, now, Colt, generally I do this anyhow for all my other guests, but a lot of people generally who follow the Indianapolis Colts probably know who you are. But as you said before we got on, you've only been doing this insider stuff for the Colts for about 2 years now when you came over from the covering the Indianapolis 500. Why don't you give our listeners and viewers a little information about yourself, what you do, where they can find you?
Sure, yeah. So like, as you mentioned, I used to cover IndyCar for the Indianapolis Star. I did that for about 3 years, and I jumped onto the Colts last year I'd say about 2 weeks before Andrew Luck retired. So kind of thrown right into the mix on that one. That was a whirlwind of obviously 2 weeks before that happened, and then that was 2 weeks before the season, so that was crazy. So yeah, been on the beat for a couple of years now. So yeah, you can find me on Twitter at Jim Ayello, and all my stuff's on IndyStar.com. And yeah, I do the Cover 2 podcast with Joel Erickson. I'm sure a lot of Colts fans follow him as well. Obviously, a great follow. One of the best beat reporters I've ever been around. So yeah, so that's where you can find me. That's where you can find my work.
All right. Well, maybe I could get him on this stream at some point too. Maybe you could give me a good word with Joel. A couple guys I've had a little bit of trouble getting a hold. I never tried to get a hold of Joel yet. I tried to get a hold of Steven, but he never replies. I don't understand why. But so what I'm going to go ahead and let everyone listening and watching know, I'm going to go through a few questions that I already sent Jim to let him know, hey, a little heads up on where this is going to go. And then afterwards, I'm going to get to all the questions and comments over here on YouTube. So Colts Nation, John Davis, you guys out here that already threw out questions, I will get to them, I promise. But first and foremost, there's some things that were on my mind that I want to get to. And Jim, first and foremost, how difficult has it been from last year to this year covering the Indianapolis Colts with the new COVID protocols?
Yeah, so I'm glad you asked, because the first thing is I get a chance to maybe explain like my background here. By the way, yours is phenomenal. I'm looking at it, all the stuff you got going on behind you. It's great. But like your whole life kind of changed covering this team. Like right now, just to give you guys, it sounds, it's a good sound studio, I feel like, but really I'm just in my laundry room with the door closed, because right now I got a newborn. He's like 5 months old and he's sleeping somewhere in the house. So when you're doing these Zoom chats with the Colts or with podcasts or anything like that, you got to go find your own quiet space and make sure you're not disturbing anybody. And so that's where I am right now. And that's kind of like, that's been life. I was laughing the other day because I have this green water bottle. It looks like a beer bottle though. And I went to drink it while I was interviewing Colts. And I went, oh, people are going to think I'm drinking beer while I'm interviewing these Colts. And it's really it's just like a green can or a bottle, but it was water. But anyway, just weird, different things like that. But to your point, like you do miss being in the locker room. You do miss being able to just kind of walk up to guys one-on-one. And, a lot of times, we get these guys on the Zoom chats and I only have a question for them. Or sometimes I have 6. But, you only get one, or one or maybe 2. If you're lucky, you get a chance to follow up before everybody else gets their turn on these Zoom calls. So, and again, like a lot of the times, and the Colts have done, I should say this too, the Colts as an organization have done a phenomenal job of giving us as much access as possible. From what I've heard from other guys on the beat and again, other teams, it's not been as much access as we've gotten. So I have to, you got to thank the Colts for dealing with a really tough circumstance and giving us as much access as possible. You can get one-on-one to get on the phone with some of these guys. But, there's just, it eliminates the time of being able to walk up. For me, a lot of times last year, I walk up to Zach Pascal. Hey, what happened on this play? What did you do? How did you see it? And he breaks down a play for me. That I just don't get a chance to do that anymore, or as much, I should say. So it's been really tough. You don't get a lot of that kind of opportunity. And you just miss being in person talking to these guys. Even some of the players have said, the guys like Anthony Walker, Naheem Hines, are like, I miss seeing you guys. I miss seeing you guys in person. And again, I feel like you have better conversations. I feel like it's more natural setting to do that in person. So it's been weird, and the one part I hate the most, I guess, is games. I've traveled to some away games. I've stayed home for some away games. Watching on TV is fine, but obviously it's better to do it in person because you can kind of see the whole picture. And then I hate not being able to go into a locker room after the game and talking to these guys and asking them, because again, you don't want to take advantage, but the feelings are more raw. They're more, you can go in there and just say, hey, what's going on? And they'll tell you the truth a lot of the time. Whereas, they're on a Zoom call. It's not quite the same. So anyway, it's definitely been different, definitely been a challenge. But I think the NFL and the Colts have done a pretty good job of giving us access, and we're able to cover it at a relatively normal. But again, I guess that would be up to the people who follow me. Has it been, if the coverage has been as good or worse or better than the last couple of years?
Well, thank you for that inside information. Now, something a little more close to the present. The Colts' number one priority this week is to defeat the Jacksonville Jaguars to even have a chance to make the playoffs, right? But Jacksonville, they defeated Indy week 1, and it was their sole win of this season. What's the difference between these teams then and now for Indy to possibly change the outcome this go around?
Yeah, so there's some micro macro things here. And again, a micro, I'll say in this level, but they have a different quarterback, right? They have Glennon now as opposed to having Gardner Minshew. Gardner Minshew is a little bit better at creating outside of the pocket than a guy like Mike Glennon is. And I think that those kind of quarterbacks have given the Colts trouble that we've seen, even guys like Sam Darnold, guys like Joe Burrow, and then, get some of the higher tier guys like Ryan Tannehill, Sean Watson. Those guys have given the Colts trouble by creating after the play. Minshew was more like that. Glennon's more of a guy who'll stay in the pocket, so that's going to benefit the Colts. They also don't have that phenomenal undrafted rookie, James Robinson, the running back who has been, if anybody's playing fantasy, they know how great he's been this year. And they don't have him this week. They might not have DJ Chark. And then maybe the biggest missing piece component for the Colts, they don't have Josh Allen, a devastatingly good young pass rusher for the Jaguars, probably one of their best building blocks. He's not going to play this week. And that's huge for the Colts, who are playing this musical chairs right now at left tackle. It's obviously not going to be Anthony Costanzo. He's out for the year. Not going to be Raven Clark. We're going to see who it is. Best guess is that it could be Jared Valley here, who they signed as out of retirement to come give them some depth, or it could be Chaz Green, or it could be Quinnen Nelson kicking out from left guard to play left tackle. We don't know for sure yet. The Colts are probably not going to tip their hand. I'll talk to Frank Reich a little bit later today, but we don't know for sure. They probably won't tell us. But again, no matter what they do, that's going to be tough to replace. But not having to face a great pass rusher like Josh Allen, that will certainly help. And then, you kind of look back. Maybe I guess this is more I don't know if this is micro or macro still, but like Phillip Rivers was still kind of getting accustomed to who the Colts were. Still getting a feel for his weapons, still getting a feel for the Colts offense. Again, he knows Frank Reich, he knows Nick Sirianni, he knows the offense, but it was his first game. He had no real training camp, they had no preseason. It was kind of just getting thrown in there and against a different defense for the first time. So there, you have to take that into consideration, which I think it kind of led to some weird stuff, and things that don't happen to the Colts this year. So they lost a turnover battle, which I know they did in Pittsburgh, but they didn't do very often. They lost 2-0. They actually put up 450 yards of offense. It's weird for teams to put up 450 yards of offense and only score 20 points. They were miserable in the red zone. And that's been a trend this year. They had some red zone struggles early. They were a little bit better in the middle of the year. But again, some weird things kind of had to go wrong for the Colts to lose to the Jaguars. And that's just perfectly Jacksonville. I think they just go to Jacksonville and weird things seem to happen to the Colts all the time. So the Colts have had more success against the Jaguars at home. That's where they get them this time. I don't think they're going to have trouble with them. Maybe that'll come back to bite me, that statement in a few days. But I think they're going to be able to handle their business against the Jaguars, and then have to hope for the best with those with those other games.
Well, with the Jets winning last week, Jaguars, they can legitimately win, and they have that lock, for that first pick. And a lot of people believing that it's Trevor Lawrence. So those of you who think that the Jaguars might tank just to keep that, it ain't happening. They're going to come in. They're going to come in hard and try to win this game and put their imprint on the playoffs this week. Keep Indianapolis out. So expect them to come in and really, really fight tough. Speaking of the AFC playoff picture, it's murky at best, especially if the Colts defeat the Jaguars on Sunday. Can the Colts, if they do make the playoffs, can they hold their own against some of the AFC's elite teams like the Chiefs or the Bills?
A few weeks ago, if you'd asked me that, I think I would have said yes. But that was a guy that believed maybe a little bit more in this defense and what the defense was doing. I just don't know. The secondary has not been good recently. Colts fans know Rocky Sin is gettable. Teams target him. They go after him during early in games and late in games when they need first downs. TJ Carey has been a great value buy for Chris Ballard and the Colts. But again, there's a reason he was only paid about $1 million to play in the NFL this year. He's good, but he's not great. Xavier Rhodes has had a great year, but again, the teams haven't targeted him as much. But Kenny Moore, like, listen, all-star slot corner, does so many different things well, but it can be beat in coverage. Actually, it's having a kind of a mediocre coverage year. Teams, again, have targeted at Kenny Moore. They put some of the better receivers in the slot, and they'll go at Kenny. And again, sometimes he does well, sometimes he doesn't. But again, he's not a lockdown corner out of the slot by any means. So those are the things that worry me, and where I was thinking, okay, the weapons that the Chiefs have, the weapons that the Bills have, the Colts can handle that if they get pressure on Mahomes, if they get pressure on Josh Allen. And they haven't been able to get as much pressure recently. The edges have been a disappointment. Justin Houston kind of is up and down a little bit. Kamoko Toure, I don't know if he's 100% healthy yet. He only, he played 33 snaps a couple weeks ago. Okay, things are going well. He's getting back to his normal routine. Then he plays 12 snaps last week. So, okay, what's going on here? Al-Kani Muhammad didn't have a very good game. DeForest Buckner, again, incredible year, but he's playing on a hurt ankle, and that might be limiting him in terms of how much pressure he's able to generate in the interior. It's just, if they're not able to get pressure and help out that secondary and make that secondary has to cover for more than 2, 3, 4 seconds against guys like Mahomes, against guys like Allen, that's going to be a real problem. Now, everybody will tell you on the other side of the ball, you have to have an offense that can kind of stick with those teams. If you have to get in a shootout, you have to be able to play with them. I actually think the Colts offense, to a point, could stay with them. The way they've run the ball recently makes me feel better. They can keep the ball away from guys like Allen and Mahomes and play the clock control game. And Phillip Rivers, up until last week, had been pretty good. And again, I really do think that some of the bad throws that he had can be attributed to playing with their 9th and 10th left tackles at this point. I think he was under pressure and he started to feel a little bit more. So again, with a healthy line, which they won't have with Costanzo, but at least a sorted out line, I thought maybe they would be able to stay with the Chiefs and the Bills in that way. But the defense has kind of made me change my mind. And then again, without having that healthy offensive line and letting Rivers stay comfortable in the pocket, I'm not so sure.
Yeah, it's kind of odd that we talked about, Pittsburgh's the pressure off the edges affecting Rivers, because for the season, Phillip Rivers is one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL QBR wise while under pressure, which is a very, very odd thing. But I guess when you have it snap in, snap out throughout an entire game, it's going to have wear and tear on you and really get to you after a while. Okay, so Jonathan Taylor has stated multiple times throughout the season that even though Marlon Mack's not been with him during the games, on the field and stuff, but he's been instrumental in Taylor's development as the season's progressed. What are some of these changes that supports his statement that you've seen in Taylor's play on the field?
Well, so before we get to Marlon Mack, I want to say that we ask about Jonathan Taylor quite a bit because there's obviously – it's a lot of interest in what he's done and trying to get that running game going. And we say, what are the things? What are you guys seeing that's different? What are you, asking the coaches, Nick Sirianni and Frank Reich? And I swear they come back to reps and confidence a lot of the time. And again, that sounds like coach speak, and it is in a way. But if you think about it, it does make a lot of sense. The guy is, I wrote about this a couple weeks ago. He didn't have a lot of experience running out of shotgun. That was something he didn't do a lot at Wisconsin. He needed reps. And the more reps you get, the more confidence you get, and the better you get at it. The more reps you get with an offensive line, the better you understand how they block it. There's something Marlon Mack talked about a lot last year, and I'm sure this is one of the ways that he has influenced Jonathan Taylor, is to say, hey, listen, you got to understand how to read these blocks, and it's only going to come with feel on some of these plays. And the more you do it, the better you're going to understand. But you develop a chemistry with your offensive line. I know people talk about chemistry with receivers and quarterbacks. Same thing with running backs and their offensive line. You do develop a chemistry. You understand how a guy's going to block, how long a guy's going to block, how to set up a block and position the guy in the right way before you make a cut. I think a lot of the times for Jonathan Taylor, it's not like he all of a sudden he had talent in college, he lost the talent with the Colts, and then he got it back. That's not what happened. He just got more confident inside this offense. He got more confident in being able to read the blocks of his offensive line. And I actually think the offensive line played a little bit better down the stretch too. I think there's some credit that they deserve too for kickstarting this running game a little bit. But the thing about Jonathan Taylor too is he's making decisive. This is the thing I think that Jonathan Taylor told us that Marlon Mack told him, which is that when you make a cut in the NFL, that's it. Don't look back. Don't question it. Just do it. And I think we've seen Jonathan Taylor, especially over the last month or so, really commit to what he's decided to do. If he's going to cut back and not go through the hole that he's designed, he's going to commit to it. And to me, what that's generated is a lot more broken tackles. It was weird in the beginning of the year. Like a guy that big, a guy that fast was not breaking tackles at all. He was one of the worst running backs in the NFL at breaking tackles. And now we're seeing him break them left and right. Well, that's because he's hitting holes with confidence. He's running 2 lanes with confidence. And what happens is when you run with confidence, you're running with speed and you're able to shed blockers a little bit, or shed tacklers a little bit easier. And that's what we're seeing Jonathan Taylor do. And again, the guy is just so talented and so big and so fast that when he's doing these things with confidence, we've seen what kind of running back he can be.
Absolutely. With the emergence of other players at their positions, speaking of Marlon Mack and Jonathan Taylor, many fan favorites for the Colts may not be returning next season. Guys like Marlon Mack, Anthony Walker Jr., Malik Hooker, just to name a few. In your opinion, is there any chance that Ballard extends offers to some of these guys and that it might get accepted by some of these players and we see them back on, maybe a lesser contract or something?
Yeah, so let's start with a guy like Marlon Mack is a great example. The Achilles injury is devastating, especially for a running back who has to make cuts. And an Achilles injury maybe for an offensive lineman is not quite as devastating. It's obviously terrible for your career, but it's not as bad as for a running back who has to make a lot of cuts and do things like that. So there's going to be a warning sign hanging over Marlon Mack for any team that wants to sign him as a free agent. If I'm Marlon, one of the things I'm considering is the Colts still know who I am. I've been rehabbing with them all the time. I've asked a couple times. Tom Rathman said he's still in the building. He's still rehabbing. We still see him. They know him. They know what his abilities are. To me, I would say, yeah, I'll take a 1-year contract for a lesser amount of money. And this is a team that will probably give him opportunity to prove how good he can be alongside Jonathan Taylor. They might try that one punch they talked about all training camp, all preseason, was to say, let's do 1-1, Taylor and Mack. And again, maybe it'll be favoring Taylor, depending on how good Mack looks or not. But at least this is a team that knows him, that likes him, that will give him an opportunity. I think there's an argument to be made for Marlon Mack that his best opportunity for resurrecting his career after this devastating injury is to stay in Indianapolis. And like I said, even if it's a little bit less money, and do that. Now, again, if another team says, hey, Marlon, we think you've recovered from your Achilles injury, we want to give you a 2 or 3 year deal, we want you to be our starter, he should go jump at that chance. Obviously, absolutely. But I don't know if any team's going to do that coming off the injury he's at. Now, a couple of other guys you said, Blake Hooker, don't see him coming back. Just the way Blackman has played. They have Kari Willis. They might draft, some other safeties, and they have their. I just don't see it. Depending on, he might want to. Again, Malik's a guy that still has a lot of talent. Might just want to go somewhere else, and maybe a change of location will be good for him. And again, it's one of those guys too. It's interesting. Like you hear Marlon's around the building all the time, and I don't think we've asked specifically about Malik Hooker, but you just don't hear as much about Malik from some of these players as often. And again, maybe he might still be in the building. I don't know. I should have asked and I haven't, but you just don't hear about him as much as you hear about a guy like Marlon. And Marlon's a guy that's constantly on Twitter, constantly cheering on his team. He's always talking about the Colts. And Malik's not a big social media guy, but you just don't see those things. So that's an interesting one. Anthony Walker's another interesting case. That's going to be a tough one for Chris Ballard. The team, Frank Reich, Chris Ballard, like the Darius Leonard, they love Anthony Walker, love him, and he's a critical part of what they do. Can it be replaced? Yeah, because he's not a guy that has an immense amount of talent. Like he's so talented that you can't replace it. That's something that I think. I mean, look, Chris Ballard has had an excellent draft history with linebackers right now, like incredibly good with Darius Leonard and Bobby Okereke. These two guys are very, very good players. I think he could trust himself to find another good guy who could replace Anthony Walker's production on the field. Can he find somebody to replace Anthony Walker's leadership and friendship with all these players? I don't know. I don't know if he wants to. It's going to depend. The financial situation facing the Colts coming in the future is very complicated. Like they have all this cap space, but it's going to get eaten up so quickly when you extend Quinnen Nelson, when you extend Braden Smith, when you extend Darius Leonard. Like those guys are coming. Those guys are coming up, and you have to figure out how you're going to do that. They already extended Grover Stewart. They paid DeForest Buckner a lot of money. They're going to have to pay a quarterback a lot of money, presumably, unless they're drafting somebody. But again, if Phillip Rivers comes back, you're talking about another $25 million probably. So the money's going to get eaten up pretty quick. I'm trying to think of the other guys that I think are. T.Y. Hilton is another one that I think is going to be a really interesting case. Like again, Frank Reich loves T.Y. Hilton. Phillip Rivers has developed a great chemistry and friendship with T.Y. Hilton. Players on this team love T.Y. Hilton. Now, he's 31. There are really good receivers entering the free agent market right now. Guys like Kenny Galladay, guys like Juju Smith-Schuster, guys like Chris Godwin. I think there's a couple others I'm missing, but some really young, good receivers. Maybe Chris Ballard says we could take that money and give it to T.Y. Hilton and extend him for a few years, or we could take that money and maybe a few more $1 million and pay one of those younger guys to come in and be a building block player. I don't know. Right now we know that the Colts and T.Y. Hilton have not had extension talks. They put those on the back burner once the season started. There was some, like I said, I think there was some tried at conversations before the year, but once the season started, that was it. And so nothing has started up since then. And I don't know what's going to happen next, but that's one that's really fascinating to watch is, do you value the veteran who wants to be back, who wants to retire a Colt, or do you try to go in a different direction, a younger guy, and maybe a more talented guy, I don't know, a guy, again, depending on who you're talking about, and bring him on for 3 or 4 or 5 more years.
What do you know about there's a question from Colts Nation. Do you know anything about the tackle signing that we had acquired?
Jared Veltier, is that right? I'm kidding, yeah. I hope I say his name right. I have Veltier. Yeah, I mean, he was a guy that he was, at one point in his career, was a very, very good tackle and offensive lineman. I think he moved around the offensive line a little bit, but he is not. He retired, obviously. So I think he thought his playing days were done. He's been moving around. He's been moving around from different teams a lot recently. I think it was most recently with the Packers. He decided to retire. Again, he got an offer from the Cowboys at one point in the offseason, and then but he decided to retire instead. But again, this is a guy who started a lot of games in his career. He started in Oakland. He started in Arizona. He signed with Denver. He's played a lot of games. He's like I said, he's a veteran that I think that the Colts, they've seen a lot of tape on him. Chris Ballard has seen a lot of tape on him, and they were able to pull him out of retirement. And again, like, he was asked by Dallas, he didn't go. He's asked by the Colts, he did go. Maybe there's something there. Maybe he thought, okay, this is a team that can then do some damage, and he's ready. He's motivated or something like that. Obviously, the problem for us is we normally get to go out to practice and watch these guys. And he just got to the Colts a couple days ago. We haven't got to go to practice. COVID restrictions say if the practice is outside right now, we can go watch. If practice is indoors, we can't. And practice has been indoors. The weather in Indianapolis hasn't been very good, so we're not allowed to. We can't go see him, and it's hard to see. Like, is he lining up with the starters, or how good does he look fresh? Like, we don't know those things yet, and so unfortunately, that's one of the restrictions that COVID puts on us. But we do know that he's had a long history of being a pretty good player, but that he was done and not in the NFL anymore. So it's kind of hard to know exactly what he's got left in the tank.
All right, before I continue with more of these questions from the live chat. Please don't forget, smash that like button. If you're not subscribed, please subscribe. Check out the description below where you can find myself and Jim on Twitter. Make sure you give us a follow. Now, another question is about Will Holden. I get that TJ Watt is a very dangerous guy. We understand that Myles Garrett is a very dangerous guy. And those are 2 games where Anthony Costanzo was out. We had to put in backup tackles, and it just did not look good, especially with Braden Smith out. You had 2 backup tackles
Yeah, exactly.
After injuries. What are your thoughts on Will Holden? Is he a guy that you think could actually play well enough as a backup, or do you think we need to move on and maybe find someone a little bit better?
I actually thought Will Holden didn't play too poorly against Pittsburgh before he got hurt. Like I said, I actually think Colts fans and the Colts would feel pretty good if they're going into this game in the playoffs if Will Holden was still healthy. And again, he might be. He's got an ankle injury. It's going to keep him out this week. But if they go to the playoffs, maybe you feel a little bit better about them. I like you said, he's not a star, and they did struggle a little bit. But I thought their struggles were more on the right side with Chaz Green, who struggled against, TJ Watt. One of the best, maybe a defensive player of the year candidate. Like, that was going to happen. I actually thought Mark Lewinsky didn't have a very good game. And that hurt a lot of the times where if Philip Rivers tried to step up in the pocket, that wasn't available to him. The pocket wasn't created by the center and the 2 guards. And so Lewinsky didn't have a very good game. That doesn't help when you have Chaz Green on the right and that right side is coming down. I actually, like I said, so get to your question. I thought Holden played pretty well. And again, I haven't seen a lot of him. He was a practice squad player. So that does, I always think the NFL does a pretty good job of evaluating talent. Most of the time, they know what they're doing. Again, you see guys like James Robinson who are undrafted and are stars, but most of the time they do a pretty good job. There's probably a reason the Colts were able to go sign him off the Ravens practice squad and plug him right and grab him. So maybe not the most talented guy in the world, but again, I thought he played pretty well, and you can live with pretty well in the as a backup tackle. And going into the playoffs, even if you have Quinnen Nelson back at his normal position of left guard and everybody else is healthy along the line, Braden Smith, Brian Kelly, Mark Lewinsky, you can live with not Anthony Costanzo at left tackle. And you can win with that as long as you're healthy at the other 4 spots. It gets harder, as you mentioned, when you're banged up everywhere else. But actually, like I said, I was relatively impressed with Will Holden. It was only 1 game, but I think going into the future, yeah, you could maybe feel good about him as a backup tackle option.
Okay. All right. If this was your team, you're going into this week against the Jacksonville Jaguars, and they have the 3rd worst rushing defense in the NFL. I mean, they give up over 140 yards a game on average. You would think you'd want power up front and run Hines and Taylor. Would this be a situation where you might put Pinter or someone like that at left guard and move a certain Quinnen Nelson over to that left tackle and just be like power rush all game long?
Well, so it's a really interesting question. And because a lot of times the Colts run game is predicated on Quinnen Nelson playing left guard. They run behind him. They run behind a pulling Quinnen Nelson. So in my mind, if you pull Quinnen Nelson out of left guard and put him somewhere else, you may be weakening your running ability just a little bit. Not saying a ton, but I think that guard play, especially the way they use Quinnen Nelson, again, so many times last year, Frank Reich and Jacoby Brissett, so many other guys, they referred to him as a weapon. Like an actual, you only hear that for receivers and running backs. They refer to Quinnen Nelson as a weapon. They use him like that. They run behind him often. They, like I said, pulling him too. So they do a lot with him. You move him to left tackle, I don't think you do as much with him in the run game. Now that said, as you like you pointed out, you might have a better offensive line as a whole, and to be able to just dominate the Jaguars if you put Quinnen Nelson at left tackle, a guy like Danny Pinter at left guard. They just activated this morning Joey Hunt, who was the guy that played left guard when Quinnen Nelson moved to left tackle against the Raiders. Maybe they put Joey Hunt back there. And again, that line looked okay. It was only a couple series, but that line looked okay when they did it. And so maybe that's what they do this weekend. Overall, they should be able to beat the Jaguars banged up because the Jaguars are a terrible team and they should just be able to handle this. But going into the playoffs, it's a really good question as to what you're saying is, do you take Quinnen Nelson out of the place where he's an all-pro and try to strengthen that left tackle spot, which Frank Reich has said is still, I know it's kind of a cliche, but it's still probably the most valuable spot on the offensive line. So you take your most talented guy and put him at the most valuable spot. That does seem like a good idea. I just think you maybe weaken your running ability just a little bit, but maybe that's worth it to solidify that left tackle spot.
All right. I want to thank Anna Banana, Seagal 2293, Rocket Blast Joe, and Timma for joining on Sportscaster as well. Thank you so much. If you're watching this, let's see. Yeah. If you're watching this on Sportscaster or listening to this on the podcast, on the featured podcast here on Sportscaster with Spotify and iTunes and all that other, please don't forget to make sure you follow. That way you're notified next time I have something out to upload. The Indianapolis Colts defense over the last 2 months has been pretty much, you know what's going to happen. You just don't know what half it's going to happen in, right?
That's exactly right.
Some games, the first half, the Colts defense is utterly completely, you can't move against them at all, right? Give up less than 100 yards. They've done it against multiple teams. And then in the second half, it's like they don't even exist. And then you can flip-flop it on other games. What do you think the cause of this is?
I was hoping you weren't going to ask me that. I don't know. I don't know. I mean, Matt Eberflus says, we've asked Matt Eberflus this, at least a dozen times this year, because you're right. For a long time, it was defense comes out, struggles in the first half, dominates in the second half. This time against Pittsburgh, they were great in the first half and then couldn't do anything in the second half. And I think the Pittsburgh game, and the Ravens game too, you're right. It's a good call. The Pittsburgh game was maybe a little easier to diagnose just because I think, look, what happened was the Steelers decided, hey, we're going to throw downfield. They for 4 weeks they were throwing quick slants, they were throwing hitch routes, everything was up near the line of scrimmage. The Colts were pressed near the line of scrimmage, and they said we're going to take that away, and they took it all away. And as you mentioned, Steelers had less than 100 yards of offense in the first half. Steelers said, okay, we have to change something up. I don't know why they finally decided to do it against the Colts when they hadn't done it for the previous 3 or 4 weeks, but they decided to do it against the Colts, and they said, our receivers are very talented. They're going to beat those corners. And they did. I mean, so many times there were one-on-one coverage, and again, whether it was man coverage or it was a zone, cover 4 or something in some instances, or a cover 3 where you had a deep safety or a deep corner one-on-one with the receiver, the Steelers were winning those matchups. You saw it happen with Deontay Johnson beating Rocky Sin. You saw it with TJ Carey getting flagged for, again, a pass interference I don't think was maybe legitimate, but you got flagged for it anyway. But they said our receivers are better than your DBs. That's how we're going to do it. And so I think that was an easier shift to detect. And then again, like we talked about earlier in this podcast, like the pass rush just wasn't there. And Big Ben but Justin Houston talked about that. He said Roethlisberger was getting rid of the ball quick. Even some of the deep throws, they were more timing routes, which should ring a lot of bells for Colts fans because that's what Phillip Rivers does. He creates big plays by throwing really early on anticipation, and that's what Big Ben was doing. So, but overall, I have no idea. I have no idea why in some halves they can get a pass rush and some other halves they can't. I have no idea why in some halves it looks like their corners are they have great coverage abilities and some others they don't. Like, I don't know what the change is. Matt Eberflus has said, like, we've looked at the half-to-half swings, and it's really just comes down to execution and detail. I'm telling you, I know there's like this big, like, how Matt Eberflus is making a ton of adjustments at halftime. Maybe a little, but really it's not huge adjustments. It's not like he's blitzing a ton more. He doesn't blitz a lot anyway. It's not like he's changing up, like they're playing some man in one half and then all zone in the second half. That's not what's happening. Like, he's playing a lot of cover 2, a lot of cover 3. They played a lot of man against Pittsburgh, and he'll do that occasionally. He blitz more against Pittsburgh. He blitz more against Detroit. Like, he does change things up. But again, like, I don't think there's these massive shifts at halftime. I just think it does come down to execution, and I cannot explain to you, and it's frustrating, I think, as a Colts player or anybody who covers the Colts, anybody who watched the Colts, to be like, what is happening? Why are they so different one half to another? I wish I had a good answer.
Well, for the Pittsburgh game, it's kind of to me, as I watched the game, it seemed like the decision to start taking shots downfield came right after the Kari Willis concussion, right? Tavon Wilson come in, and they just seemed like, you know what, we're going to target that side, and we don't think that your backup Tavon can actually get out there quick enough to help. And that seems like that's what happened.
It's a great point.
So, speaking of concussions and Kari Willis, I'm looking at the injury report. We got 3 concussions on the team. Besides Kari, we got Rock and we got Michael Pittman Jr. Now, I see that Pittman Jr. had full practice yesterday, so that's a good sign for him, right? What about the other 2 guys?
Yeah, well, we don't know. I mean, like I said, they still have a chance to play. That we know is, again, that they still have a chance to get in, but they actually have to practice today, which we'll find out. Again, Frank Reich talks it a little bit later this afternoon. We'll find out, did they practice? If they didn't, they're out. And he'll probably say before the injury report comes out. But they have to be able to have gotten on the field in terms of just the way the concussion protocol works. As you mentioned with Michael Pittman, pretty good sign that he was a full participant in practice yesterday. I would assume he's ready to go by the time Sunday rolls around. The one that does concern me is Rock, just because it kind of came up later. Like, we knew Kari Willis had the concussion after the game, and they've been addressing that. And again, concussions are so weird. There's no way to pin, like, one is not like another. It's very hard. Like, everyone has kind of different symptoms and different experiences with it. But they knew about Kari Willis right after the game, and they've been addressing it since. Rock only I think they only found out about it either a day or 2 later, which again does happen with concussions, that those symptoms come up a little bit later. That is concerning when they come up a couple days later, and then you don't really know how long how long those symptoms are going to last. So we'll find out from Frank Reich when we talk to him today. You know, he doesn't always tip his hand, and he might say, hey, we got him back out to practice, but we're going to see how they feel by Sunday. And then that we won't know. It might be up in the air. But I guess obviously the biggest concern of the 3, because Pittman's probably going to play, and then Rock, you do have TJ Carey, they've been rotating starting anyway. You could probably play TJ Carey most of the game. I mentioned earlier, DJ Chark probably won't play, or might not play for the Jaguars. I actually haven't checked the status in a while, but might not play for the Jaguars, and they don't have great receiving weapons anyway. So you could probably get by with Xavier Rhodes and TJ Carey. The one that you are, like you pointed out, that they're most concerned about is Kari Willis. Is he back? That definitely seemed to change the dynamic of the defense a little bit. Tavon Wilson is a thumper. He's a good guy to have up in the line of scrimmage. He hits hard. He's not a great guy in coverage. He's just not going to be that guy in coverage. You might maybe see in terms of coverage. I was actually surprised we didn't see a little more George Odom in some of those coverage situations. He played well for them in third down situations last year, and he's been so good on special teams this year. So I thought maybe, hey, they might mix in a guy like George Odom on obvious passing situations. Didn't see a lot of that last week. Maybe see it this week.
A little thing that's not really getting a whole lot of coverage right now is the Colts defensive line is suffering some injuries as well. Danico Autry has been dealing with this hip injury for quite some time now. He's been full practice yesterday, but DeForest Buckner with that ankle injury has not practiced this week at all. Is there any news coming out about him?
Not yet. Like I said, I'm telling you guys, it stinks that we can't go to practice. With all the practices indoors, not being able to be there, it hurts. And we talked to Frank Reich on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. And so, I don't know if there was a DeForest Buckner question asked last on Wednesday. I don't know if there was, but obviously that question will be asked today during his press conference, and we'll say, hey, what do you think he's ready? Like they've been cautious with some of these injuries before. They held out DeForest Buckner a little bit last week, just like they've been holding out Phillip Rivers in some practices, just because they're being cautious with this. But they were pretty sure last week going into the week that like on Friday, Frank Reich said DeForest Buckner is playing. That's happening. So hopefully, you get the same commitment from Frank Reich today when we ask about it. But you're right. Not practicing 2 days in a row is concerning. And again, it's not like this ankle injury, just because he had 3 sacks against Houston and returned miraculously in that game, doesn't mean it all of a sudden doesn't hurt him anymore. It's not bothering anymore. It won't limit him in games. And again, I think you can watch that Pittsburgh game and say, yeah, he did look a little bit limited. And so we'll have to see if it's getting better, if it's staying the same, where DeForest Buckner is in his progression in terms of recovery from that injury.
All right, so there was an interesting question here with Swaggy wanting to know who the Colts might play if we sneak in on Sunday. But I think the better question is, of the 4 games this Sunday that the Colts need specific things to happen with, 4 teams to lose, which one of the Miami versus Buffalo, the Baltimore, Cincinnati, the Cleveland, Pittsburgh, and the Houston, Tennessee game, which one of those do you think is the better chance of them possibly losing the game and allowing the Colts to make it into the playoffs?
Yeah, I don't know if Colts fans are going to like this answer, but I think it's Houston, Tennessee. I honestly, okay, so we'll look at the other ones. Like, I don't think we need to talk much about Baltimore, Cincinnati. Now, Baltimore, I think are rolling right now. Cincinnati's on a very good team. They have had some upset wins this year, and they could potentially do it again, but I think that's the lowest likelihood.
2 in a row.
Right, that's true. And they have played well recently, but so is Baltimore. And so, I think Baltimore's a better team. They probably take care of business. I would have said the number 1 chance was Buffalo beating Miami. Now, the way I'm reading the tea leaves from Sean McDermott, who doesn't want to commit to we're playing our starters or we're not playing our starters, is he's not playing his starters. I don't know why you wouldn't have said it, and if you weren't, there's no competitive advantage if you're not playing your starters. So, I'm sorry, if you are playing your starters, and I'm sorry. So, like, I think what I would guess is it's something maybe similar to what he did last year when the Bills were kind of locked into their seed, was maybe play him for a quarter, maybe play him for a couple of series, and then get him out and have as healthy as a team as you can going into the playoffs. So that's why I downgraded that one. I just, again, Buffalo could still win that game, even playing with some of their backups. But again, I just don't trust backups against starters most of the time, which is why, again, I don't trust the Steelers to beat the Browns, because we already know Ben Roethlisberger isn't playing. Marquise Pouncey isn't playing. TJ Watt isn't going to play. I think they're going to bench Cam Hayward as well. Mm-hmm. So that's just like, those are the guys who are not playing like off the bat. He might pull guys as they go.
But the Browns have COVID protocol going on with their team as well. So, I mean, it might balance out a little bit.
It could. You're right. And today, I just saw they opened up their facility again. So they're getting back to practice, and they have lost the key guys. They're going to be down at least 2 linebackers at this point. And so but they get the receivers back. I think they're getting their 2 starting linemen back, Jedrick Wills and Wyatt Teller. Wyatt Teller having like an incredible all-pro season. If he's back out there, they should be able to run the ball pretty well, even against the Steelers. So again, all of these are possible. I'm not saying they're all impossible. I'm just saying the odds I like the best are Deshaun Watson pulling a rabbit out of his hat and beating the Titans, whose defense has been just a train wreck this year, and multiple, like we saw what happened in Green Bay. They just put up 40+ points against them with ease. And that's where the Titans defense has been almost all season. Not very good. Haven't been able to contain anybody. Even I think it was the last time these 2 teams played, it went to overtime. Tennessee barely won. It was 42-36. It was just people lighting up the scoreboard in that game. And so if Deshaun Watson can do that, and again, Deshaun Watson gave overtime against the Titans, gave the Colts two tough games. Like, it's not like Houston, again, I know their win-loss record says they stink, but they've played pretty close games a lot of the time and just came out on the losing end. Might happen again. I just think with Deshaun Watson playing at an MVP level, that's your best chance of winning.
Well, I mean, also NFL fans, Colts fans, AFC South fans, we got to remember that I don't think the Texans were actually playing football until week 5 when O'Brien got fired. So they've had a short season, and they've been in some very, very close games. And you bring up the Green Bay. I brought this up earlier on another stream of mine. Aaron Rodgers just tore this Titans defense apart, and Deshaun Watson can do the exact same thing. And if he gets up 2 or 3 scores in the first half, that really limits how much you can use your biggest weapon in Derrick Henry. And that could really pose a problem for the Titans. And I completely agree with you on this.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at the box score now. The last time these teams played, it was week 6, I believe, and it was Deshaun Watson threw for 335 yards, 4 touchdowns, no interceptions, had a passer rating of 138.9. I mean, he ripped the Titans apart. There's no reason he can't do it again.
Absolutely. All right, so we've been doing this for 40 minutes. I know you got family stuff you got to do. It's New Year's. Happy New Year's to you and everybody watching and listening. I really appreciate you guys taking your time out of your day on this holiday to sit here and join us talking about the Indianapolis Colts. Jim, I hope you're having a good day and had a good holiday midnight.
I wasn't up. I went to bed. That's what happens when you have, as I said, that's what happens when you have a newborn, is you go to sleep when you get a chance. And he was asleep before midnight, so was I.
Yeah, my wife was asleep too until the gunshots started going off everywhere, and then of course woke up.
Yeah, that'll wake you up.
That wakes you up. A lot of people are like, "Oh, those are fireworks." No, they're not. Not in Indiana. That's not fireworks. There might be a few sprinkled in there, but now maybe in the main city like Indianapolis, it might be, but when you're in the suburbs, smaller towns like Marion, where I'm from, those are gunshots, and it's sad. But yes, Colts Nation, John, Davis, Swaggy, all you guys, thank you for joining. Garrett Thompson, Nobatic Brian. I hope 2021 is better for everyone than this past year was.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much again, man. I really appreciate. I apologize to you and all my followers, that I haven't had you on until now. Hopefully, we'll get a good rapport going with each other. Maybe we could do this more often.
That's good.
Thanks again. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. If you're listening later on the podcast, I'm Lawrence Owen with the Indy Star Colts Insider and the co-host of Cover 2 podcast, Jim Ayello. Have a good one.
Happy New Year.